Hi everyone. Oh, I suddenly went a bit funny. I am going to be joined on my IG live by Caggie Dunlop, and who is the podcaster of Saturn Rises. And I'm very excited to have her join us. I'm just going to invite her. Caggie's World. There we are. And see if she comes. Accept. There we are. She should be here in a minute. We're going to talk about how the... Hello, Caggie.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. I think I got the name of your podcast wrong. Is it called Saturn Returns? No.
I was like, oh, what's she going to say? It's Saturn Returns. Close.
What did I say? Saturn Rises?
Saturn Rises.
That is not good.
I had someone stop me in the street the other day and he was like, I love Mercury Rising. I was like, that's not what it's called. Thanks.
So sorry. That is really unprofessional. Anyway, Caggie, it's so lovely to see you. And we've only met once before when I came on Saturn Returns.
Yes.
And in your second series. And it's now grown into this enormous, incredibly successful podcast.
Oh, well, that's very sweet. I don't know about that, but yeah, let's say that it has. But it's been quite a journey, considering as well it only started in lockdown, which is quite bizarre.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because we're going to talk about how COVID and the pandemic has shaped and is shaping your life. So should we start with work? We're going to talk about work, love, life, health.
I am an open book.
Are you an open book? That's very exciting to know. Should we start?
We'll know in the next hour.
Tell me about starting the podcast in COVID. How did you do that?
So the idea actually happened when I was 27, when I was kind of navigating my Saturn return myself, when I was living in LA. And I thought that it would make a very good podcast. But at the time, I definitely wasn't at a place where I felt that I could start speaking about it, because I felt like as soon as I did, I had to really hold myself accountable in what I spoke about. And I wasn't quite ready to do that at that stage. And when the pandemic happened, that was just a time thing. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm going to do a podcast now that we're in lockdown. I had already started it. I'd already recorded a lot of it.
You'd started it?
Yeah, it just launched when we went into the very strange couple of years that have gone by. And so it lent itself in a way to that moment, because suddenly everyone was at home. They had more time on their hands. They definitely started leaning into more esoteric sort of niche things like moon rituals and astrology and all that kind of stuff. So I think it was it
was a wonderful alignment, in fact.
Yeah,
because when we don't have control and we kind of things hit us, we turn to forces outside of us to think, well, are there other influences? And of course, astrology and spirituality would be one of them. Do you want to kind of tell us what the underlying principle of it is? Because I've looked at a lot of your podcasts and listened to quite a few, because it's quite an eclectic mix. So is there a sort of connecting thread?
Well, I guess the connecting thread is astrology, but in the sense that you can really connect anything with astrology, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
The way that I pick my guests is who I'm interested in speaking in from my own personal perspective, obviously, because I'm going to give it a different interview based off that. But it's essentially a toolbox, or like a toolkit for those navigating challenging times under the umbrella of astrology, because I think it gives it a nice way of making people feel unified, but it's also personal. So it's like it's something outside of you that's totally beyond your control. You can sort of relinquish control to it in a way, and you're like, oh, well, that's happening, so that's why. But equally, it gives you a sense of autonomy and personal sovereignty, because it allows you to inform as an individual based off your birth chart and your star sign and all these other things. So it's always a balance between the astrology, the sort of what's happening in that sense, but then internal. So I guess it's like you.
I need to draw the curtain. Sorry, that it's light is suddenly in my face. It's how we like. I mean, the moon is one I understand a bit better because of the tides and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's so our internal tides, if you like, how they can be shifted and moved and shaped by what's happening in astrologically.
Exactly.
And so for you, the most personal is the most universal. So when you are interested in someone, like you were with me, I mean, I think you spoke to someone on a beach or someone who was reading my book or something.
Well, it was, I actually spoke to my mum saying that I wanted to get someone on to talk about grief. And she then bought me your book, and I was reading it on the beach. And then this woman came over to me quite oddly and said, "Are you enjoying it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And British people don't come up and talk to each other. And she sort of stood there for a moment and then got a bit uncomfortable. She was like, "It really helped me." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And she was like, "Yeah, my husband died, and I found it really hard because no one knew how to speak to me about it, and it felt very lonely." And she really opened up to me because of your
Because
book.
she could see a fellow traveller. She felt like you were grieving, so...
Well, I guess so. And then I ended up, we're just standing on the beach and I was hugging her and she sort of burst into tears. So it was quite a moment, actually.
Very moving.
I was like, I have to get Julie on the podcast. And I don't know how to get a hold of her. And then my old flatmate came over and she was like, picked up the book and she goes, "That's my next door neighbour." I was like,
There
perfect.
we go. Isn't that so lovely? Isn't it lovely when... And that's a kind of natural alignment, isn't it?
Totally.
There's, all of those, you could say they're coincidences and it's serendipity, or you could say that there are forces that are happening that enabled very beautiful moments like you with the woman on the beach and then meeting me. And that, I find that very touching, that story. And so, I mean, and is that what you're kind of aiming at, that we need to kind of sometimes let things happen and you can't fight them?
Exactly. Because at the time when I sort of heard about Saturn return, I was holding on for dear life, trying to control everything. And the more I tried to control things, the more things went wrong. And I felt like the world, the universe was sort of acting against me most of the time. I was very much in a victimhood mentality. And
So you were like holding on and the world was against you and
yeah, it was exhausting. But it
you
was,
felt like they were buffeted.
yeah, but it was totally a frame of mind that I, for whatever reason, had got myself into, and that I was constantly oscillating between obsessing over the past and things that had not gone my way, decisions that I made that I regretting a lot actually, and carrying probably quite a lot of shame around things, and then trying so hard to control the future based off really the fear of the past, which of course is like not a very progressive way of being, and it became very heavy. And so I guess now what I try and live by, and I don't always get it right, is to just let things unfold and trust the process a little bit more, which sounds quite woo woo. And often people are like, "Oh, I can't do that." But things just have a funny way of working out how they're supposed to. And it might not look like you think it was going to look or hoped it might look, but it might actually be better and it might be far more suited to you. You just wouldn't have thought of it.
So in a way, I mean, I completely agree with you. It's a sort of paradox, is that when you can let go of holding on, somehow you are released to be able to be who you are, and that there are many things that you can't control. And certainly living in the past is, denying the present, and you can't then take the joy from the present and move into the kind of future that you hope for because your feet are kind of stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
So with that, given that you have a kind of a shift in your attitude, and of course we can't do that every minute, every day. I had a sort of meltdown yesterday. But then it's a new day and you have a better day. Um, how I don't know anything about your private life, so I don't know whether you have a partner, whether you're single. I don't know anything about you. So how's your love life been in how has COVID shaped your love life? It's quite a tricky question.
Yeah, I'm like, my brain's going, how overshare do we want to go on this scale?
This is your choice. I am not going to push you beyond which you're happy to go. So you just tell me what you can tell me.
So I had an experience over lockdown that's quite interesting. I came out of a relationship at the end of 2019, at the very end of it, and that was a long-term relationship.
That was a loss. That was like grieving. So that was part of Saturn return. So you were grieving.
It was a huge, and I think I'm going to quote you. Is it not you that says pain is the agent of change?
Yeah, that's me, babes.
Well, I think it was after that experience where that really hurt, and it felt like I'd been massively betrayed, and I could have easily at that point gone into victim mode again. But by that stage, I'd been doing a lot of this work and practices, and so I just had enough of an anchoring and sense of self, and I think my self-worth was just enough that I was like, actually, this isn't going to derail me. I'm just going to carry on and really accelerate into what I have been sort of dipping my toe into. And so in a way, that was like a hugely transformational catalyst for me, even though it was a tremendously painful experience. It just kind of like catapulted me to really commit to something that was my own. And then from there, then we went into lockdown and stuff.
Can I pause you just in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
And so in a kind of psychological perspective, it's really interesting, isn't it, that pain is the agent of change, and also we have agency over the routes that we allow the pain to influence. So you had been doing the work, and I'm interested to know what that work is, so you can kind of take us more into that. But just with this aspect, you allowed yourself to feel the pain and grieve it, and you also chose to go for growth. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'm not going to have this relationship drown me or define me or defeat me. I'm going to use it as a kind of transition point to push me forward, know.
And I would say, to be honest, I've always been quite good at that in terms of using breakups as a sort of catalyst for bettering myself rather than allowing it to let me come undone. But this one in particular did hit slightly differently, I think.
Maybe you were ready to end as well.
Probably. But to tell you a little bit about the work that I had started therapy probably 6 months before, so that had helped me so much and really kept me on like an even keel and, like I say, anchored me. So when the breakup happened, I kind of had that foundation already there.
You had a support system.
Yeah.
You didn't kind of just collapse with nothing holding you. It was like you had things that were kind of internally giving you a kind of scaffolding to hold on to.
Exactly. And also because that infrastructure was being built independently of the relationship. It wasn't like I went to seek help because of the demise of the relationship, which I think would have had a very different kind of...
Hello.
Yeah. So I think that was really, really helpful. I also had changed my lifestyle quite a lot during that year. I don't really drink anymore, so that's something that I'd already been doing. So again, it was like I didn't suddenly stop drinking then, I already hadn't been.
And that makes a huge difference to your decision making and your choices, right? Being sober. I saw you did a whole lot on is it called alcohol curiosity?
So curiosity and then alcohol awareness. So that's the charity. So that's like been a really important part of the whole journey, really. I think it makes life a lot easier in terms of making decisions from my personal perspective.
So we got to the end of December and it kind of gave you the energy and force to break through something. So people talk about it, that you can have a breakdown or a breakthrough, and you kind of broke through
Well, the way I look at it is you have a breakup, a breakdown, a breakthrough. That is like the,
Yes, that is the process.
and to go back to what you say about pain as the agent of change. I think once that really clicked in my mind, because I think I was a massive pain avoidant. I think we all are. A lot of us are, and we live in a world where we really want everything to be sort of cookie cutter perfect, and like there's a lot of toxic positivity that goes around with that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And
so
happiness.
yeah, when I started to actually like connect the dots and be like, that really bad thing that happened led me here, and I discovered this about myself. So I kind of see it's like pain is what sculpts the clay, what it's like part of the process
Shapes you.
of becoming, and it allows you to be a better, more deep, more insightful, more empathetic person. And so after I went through that experience, I actually took myself off to Australia. I took myself away for 3 months on my own. And I just said to myself, if all I do is heal, then that is enough. And I had the best time because I just was alone in my own company. I became very,
Very eat, pray, love.
very eat, pray, love. And I just was like, I've always been quite good in my solitude. And this kind of ties into the conversation around the pandemic because that was a massive advantage for me. Because being alone is not, I
Not
love it.
intimidating.
Not intimidating at all. It's like, my solitude is my medicine. So then,
Does
yeah,
that mean you're an introvert?
I am an introvert, but I also do enjoy. I do enjoy going out to things, being around
That
people.
doesn't mean you don't get, it's where you get your energy restored. So extroverts get their energy engaging with people. Introverts engage people but have to go to a space on their own in order to restore their energy.
Yeah, that's definitely what I have to do, and so it's always like a balancing act for that. Um, but then, yeah, so in terms of love life after that, there was not much going on. I'm not nothing against them, but I'm not really a dating app kind of person. And also, I wasn't really that interested. At that time, I was quite focused on the podcast and work and wanting to get that going. And also, I kind of, I think if you, to be in a relationship, I think now it has to be because you can't not be together. I don't want to go into a relationship because I need someone to complete me. And I think I always had been that way in the past. I'd always been like, I'm not a whole human being unless I'm loved and validated by another. And so I really wanted to get myself into a place where I really didn't need anyone else in every sense. And I knew that that was going to take a bit of time. So that being said, then it was last summer I started
So
dating.
those 3 months, though, well, you've broken up and you're working on the podcast, and the time on your own, you didn't feel lonely. You were kind of focusing on your work. You didn't have the psychological energy, the emotional energy, or the wish to start a new relationship. It wasn't the right time. You kind of wanted to sort yourself out. And
Yeah,
then summer came. But it sounds like that's quite, so in some ways it was an opportunity, COVID, because it gave you space in a way. I'm not saying it's not a bad thing, COVID, but in some strange way, it gave you space to do work for yourself.
absolutely. And I think, I hope that a lot of people feel the same way. I think there was definitely a huge number of positives that I took away from it. One, that there was that space that I really needed. And to be honest, I don't know whether I would have been able to focus.
Taking it.
Yeah, like I'm someone that's quite easily distracted. I get quite overwhelmed quite easily. And so actually just having, our options limited, very limited, was actually quite powerful for me.
It's really interesting and curative.
Yeah. Because I had nothing, I just had to focus on, well, I didn't have to, but it was quite easy because I was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing. There's not like a million things happening all at once. And I'm finding that now that we're kind of things are normalizing, a little bit tricky to navigate, in all honesty.
So the transition of stepping back into going out, dating, being super busy is
And
more of a challenge than the retreating, as it were.
Exactly. And so the way I look at it, when we are retreating and in solitude, it's a lot easier. Well, that's a place where we can establish our values and who we truly are, let's say, and our like essence. But it's one thing knowing that when we're alone, but then managing to maintain that when we're interacting with the world around us, when we have perceptions, when we have, projections, all these other things going on.
Lots of data coming at you, as it were.
Exactly. And so I found that over the last couple of years, for the first time probably in my life, definitely in my life, I felt like I know exactly who I am, and I know what I value and how I want to show up in the world. And now that things are opening up and more things are happening, I can feel that sort of rocking a little bit. And I'm like, oh, yes, there are all these other, impressions and versions of me that people might want me to be. And I find that, yeah, it's been interesting.
And can you, I mean, it's this versions of you, because you sort of find your integrity in the essence of yourself alone. And yet we're born to be in a relationship. We're born to be interdependent in our love relationships, which really matter in our lives, but also in our friendships.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like your kind of next phase is working out how to navigate who you are and holding on to enough of yourself and not wanting to bend yourself to shape
Exactly.
yourself to fit.
You've nailed it. You've absolutely nailed the internal dialogue that's going on, because of course then my mind goes, oh, well, I've managed to cultivate my independence and autonomy and I'm happy. But when I've got a sort of history of data that shows that I've abandoned myself in relationships quite a lot, I'm like, oh, well, I don't know, where's the middle? And so for me, yeah, that's the chat, because I then got myself into a sort of headspace of, well, I don't want anyone. And I'm actually very content with my life as it is on my own. But like you said, well, not all of us necessarily, but I do like being in a relationship. I really love having someone to love.
Yeah.
And so coming to sort of that realization of like, how can those two coexist? How can I co-create something with someone and have that space that we both nurture and give to without that meaning that I self-abandon?
And I mean, I always think language is really useful. And you talked about co-create. So it sounds like there's a shift in yourself already, in that you're not looking for this person that's going to complete you, your soulmate. You're recognizing you're wanting to have a relationship with someone that you co-create the kind of relationship that you both want. It isn't just made. You don't find this mate who then the rest of your life you kind of go into the sunset, which is what all the movies and books do. It's how you negotiate and work out together who I am in relation to you, who you are in relation to me, and what kind of life are we going to make, and how are we going to do it that you have enough of what your needs are met and mine, and that changes all the time, depending on what's happening with your life, with your work, with committing to the relationship. Now there are so many. In my day, you dated someone, you slept with someone, and you broke up with them, or you married them. That was literally all I knew. Now it's like there's all these phases, isn't there?
And I think we talked about this on the podcast. There's a huge amount of pressure in a relationship that this person has to be all the things to you. And like you said, that belief that we're conditioned with from a very young age, and I'm going to be gender specific, obviously talking from a perspective from as a woman, that someone comes along and sort of saves you and you are this damsel in distress, and that someone just like perfectly fits your missing puzzle pieces, and there's this like enmeshment that happens that's wonderfully intoxicating. That's how I always viewed love. And so now
and that's the one you do not want.
I know, but it's quite fun for a little while.
Yeah, because it's so addictive and seductive and like heroin. but
Yeah.
it swallows you whole and then you lose yourself. So Alison Janet is just saying the Enneagram is so helpful for relationship. It's a really good, I don't know whether you've done Enneagrams with your therapist. So it's kind of recognizing your own flags, isn't it? And we're ending up talking about love, by the way, because I mean, this is a kind of half an hour, 35-minute conversation, and we haven't talked about the other stuff. But I guess is love the thing that, oh, I know what I was going to say. That you don't want them to complete you, but also what we understand is that we need a village in our lives. We need our girlfriends and our men friends and our work and the things that give our life meaning, that you don't get yourself sorted out by being with another person. But I guess you know, what everybody says is you're more likely to get what you want when you know what you want.
I think when you have established, you know, when your self-worth isn't dependent on another, there's a lot of normalized toxicity in relationships, I think, in the sense that this, you know, codependency, for instance, is something that's quite like normalized. And I think having control over your partner is something that's quite normalized. Whereas now because and friendship you just mentioned was like a huge piece for me, because realizing that platonic love can be just as profound and fulfilling and actually
meaningful
and having that in my life in the way that I do is so soul nourishing, that someone else coming in really is just like, sorry, I don't know who is at the door.
The Amazon delivery guy.
I don't,
You better get it. You better.
You mind? Sorry, he's not.
Are there any questions while she's answering the door? I'll see if there's any swans. Is that a picture of swans? Can't see any questions. We need a village, yes, not just a partner. Saved by the Bell. I'm not going to talk on my own because that feels really odd. But if there's a question, I'll respond to it while Caggie. You're back.
He was not going away. Where were we? Platonic love.
And normalized toxicity and interdependence.
Yeah, so I mean,
because I think that you do influence. The bit I was going to say is, of course, you affect each other, because what you feel is embodied as well as having a physical relationship. So this idea that you can kind of shape yourselves and remain yourselves, you will influence and shape each other, but it's finding the kind of enough of a balance, isn't there, that you're not overpowered or underpowered in it.
Which is a constant sort of adjusting of the sails, because, you know, I'm really fascinated by attachment theory and this, you know,
secure and insecure.
Yeah, and I think I'm someone that's probably quite naturally anxiously attached. And so I tend to sort of like want to contain or accelerate the relationship at an early stage in order to feel like it's stable and secure.
Safe.
So I'm constantly having to, at the moment, like allow for space, because the more I create space, and that's not like avoidance space, that's just like allowing the container of the relationship to exist as an entity outside of ourselves. And then I'm like, okay, I'm still okay, like regulating my emotional nervous system simultaneously, because it does trigger a thing in me, which is like, but if we don't, you know,
I'm going to be left. Fight or flight.
Exactly.
Takes you into abandonment. So if you have anxious attachment, obviously, so for those who don't know, this is John Bowlby's attachment theory, and the broadest way of understanding is that you have secure attachment, where you have trust in yourself and basic trust in the other, and so you don't have pre-wired responses when someone doesn't answer your text or doesn't ring when you think they're going to. You kind of basically trust that everything's going to be okay. Not always, but you have a sort of basic understanding. And then there's insecure attachment, of which there are three different aspects. There's avoidant, anxious, and I can't remember what the third one is. And if you're anxious, there's a fear of abandonment, and that can get played out in every relationship. But it sounds like you're learning the mechanism to self-soothe. So when you kind of feel that, rather than go to the phone and look to get the connection, you kind of know that you're still here, you can ground yourself, you can kind of respond and meet your need, and then probably the relationship is changed.
And also,
and thanks, Alison, for the link.
Also being able to notice when that trigger and that response is coming up and not reacting to it. Because again, I think we're so reactive, and then we also like push that onto the other person, and then the sort of dance plays out. But it's also
there's always a dance.
There's always a dance. But also, you know, as you will well know, how anxious attached people tend to get in relationships with avoidant people. So it just like reaffirms that belief system that you have. It's like, oh, well, there you go, that's what's happening. And I definitely had one of those experiences not that long ago, and I think that's when I really was like, okay, this is something that I'd like to work on about myself.
When you spot patterns, that's really helpful, because once your awareness changes your choices. The minute you're aware of a particular pattern, then of course you can recognize yourself and you can recognize the other. But just to say to people about attachment, I don't, you know, the attachment pattern in ourselves is developed in the first 5 years of our life and is affected by things that happen to us in our life. And so it is part of us. So I don't think any kind of therapy or any self-work stops your predisposition to respond in a particular way. The work of therapy and the work that, Caggie, you're talking about gives you options about not to always act it out, so that you slow down, you breathe, and then you kind of give yourself an informed choice about what am I going to do, because I recognize this is my pattern. I kind of go for hunger and like wanting to fill the hole, but actually maybe I recognize that my hole isn't filled by this man, but is a hole that I can support myself and manage, and also have a relationship with this man. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's something that I found really helpful as a tool is to have that separation of self between who I am now, who and what I am now, and the child, the inner child, because a lot of the time it's that part that's being triggered, that's reacting, that's, you know, lashing out, that's shutting down, that's being strong,
hiding in a corner.
Yeah, exactly. And often it's like such a simple thing to diffuse, but because we're not very good at communicating these things in relationship, it just leaves the other person kind of in a guessing game of like, okay, I have no idea why she's behaving this way. So also, you know, it's a challenge for me, and it is for anyone, to be able to show up in relationship and to be able to be that vulnerable to say, this is what's coming up for me and I'm going to share it with you. And again, then you're nurturing the container that you're both building together. And for me to be able to see that container as a separate entity other than myself allows me to keep giving to it, rather than being like, am I going to come undone if this isn't reciprocated?
Yeah, that makes sense. Is that when you can recognize yourself in the other and the other in you, you can move in and out and see what they're doing and see that what you're doing, and then respond to what fits to what's going on, rather than it fits to the child that is looking desperately to be picked up and kept safe, or whatever the version of that is. We're just coming to the end, and
as usual,
and Louise is saying, gosh, it's hard when they don't text back. It is really hard when they don't text back. And by the way, can I just talk about the power of not texting back? Is there something called the variable reward? So if somebody is unreliable in what they do, you are much more likely to be hooked by them. So someone who is reliable, who you send a text, 5 minutes later you get a text, you may find you're not that interested in them because they're reliable. So because you know that they're always going to. But the person who has variable reward, who you text on Monday and you thought, well, last time they texted me on Tuesday. So you look for them to text on Tuesday, but they don't text till Thursday. And then they text on Thursday, and also you then meet and you have amazing sex and you think, I'm sorted. This is done. But then they don't reply for another week. So you get totally hooked on the variable reward.
Why?
Because it's an evolutionary wiring. So it's a bit like scarcity with pumps. You know, we don't need to fill our car when you think there's lots of gas from the petrol stations.
Someone shared with me a study of the story of a study of rats, and that they had a group of rats, and then they gave the rat like a drip or something that had some treats or something in it that the rat wanted. And when the rat pressed the button, the treat came out. So press the button, the treat came out. Press the button, the treat came out.
Yeah. Pavlov's dogs. That's the equivalent of Pavlov's dogs.
Yeah, and then they did another experiment where it wouldn't always come out. So it was random.
They did it with pigeons, with pecking.
Yeah, and then of course the rat was just going when it didn't know whether it was going to get it or not. So it's kind of the same principle.
It's exactly the same, because what you don't know and what you're not sure of preoccupies you, trying to have control. Like, oh, if I send a text like this, or so it gets you playing all of the games. Whereas actually you have to respect yourself and say what your needs are, hold your boundaries. And if you're not getting your needs met, stop. Because otherwise you are bending yourself out of shape to get a reward that is never going to meet your need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But it's easier said than done. But
it's a lot easier said than done.
I feel like I'm at a place now where I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work for me.
Good. So when you own your own kind of interdependence and you can say your need and you recognize the red flag of an avoidant person who plays a game, then you can extricate yourself quicker. Not always, but quicker.
Yeah. Because I think the most important thing when it comes to relationships, and this is something I've only just realized and discovered, is that regardless of how amazing or beautiful or intoxicating they are, they have to choose you. That is like fundamentally got to be there. And if it's not, you should not be choosing them. So
that's kind of really good point.
Just like if they're playing games, then that's one thing. But if they're not actually showing up and they're not choosing you, see you later.
And the other thing is, you know, and I think this is true particularly of the apps, but all dating, is are you looking for the same things? Mm-hmm. So in dating, are they looking for dates and hookups and having fun with someone, which they could well be, which is completely legitimate. And if you're looking for the same, that really works. But if you're looking for a long-term relationship with someone who you want to get to know each other and maybe committed or not, but certainly date to find out if you are, and they're after hookups, you are never going to meet. So it's not, and I always think people wait so long before they find out what they both bloody want.
They're like walking down the aisle. They're like, are you sure we value the same things? Someone's actually said, watching this before I go on my
first Hinge date. Thank you, Jedi Masters.
But it's true, because we
have fun on your first date. Just make it fun. Like,
yeah, don't go too. I go in like it's a podcast. I'm like, so tell me about your, childhood trauma and how you're working on yourself.
So Abby, have fun and report back. Tell us on this post how it went tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I want to know.
And it is timing as well, and there's languages of love, how you both speak about what, men often do it by doing things, women often do it by saying things, all of those things. I wish you luck, Abby. Wish you luck. So we need to end, but maybe we'll have to have a further conversation.
I have to have a follow-up, yeah. But thank you so much, Julia, for having me. It's been a
I
pleasure.
think, I mean, in relation to COVID, just to sort of sign off, it sounds like in some ways it gave you an opportunity to build on what you were already building, and that that has proved very productive. It hasn't given you all the answers. You don't know exactly where you're going, but you don't want to know either, because you want to respond to the life as you're in it rather than by having control, which is what you were doing before.
Yeah, I think it has. It's been pretty helpful to me, in all honesty.
And having a break from dating was probably good for you.
Yeah, just from external pressures, because that's the thing, it did take off. I viewed it as like, okay, well, you can try something now, and you've got this free get out of jail card because COVID, you know, if it didn't work, well, we went through a pandemic. It kind of put everything in perspective where it's like, you might as well try.
So the next piece of work is integrating what you learned and putting it in your present.
Going back into the real world and managing to sort of hold on to those things. We shall see. I feel a little bit of like rockiness.
As you move in and out, nothing's perfect. It's like not cookie cutter, like you said.
Yeah.
It's a bit messy, but having the intention makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And the awareness makes a big difference.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Lovely seeing you, Caggie. Thank you so much for being so honest and open and really interesting.
Of course. Well, it was my pleasure to talk to you. I want to save it as well. I don't know how.
I'll save it.
Okay. Perfect.
And I'll put it on my grid.
Okay.
And then you can put it on yours.
Okay. Wonderful.
And you can put it on your stories. I think you can put it on your grid, but I don't have the tech knowledge. But you probably do.
Well, yeah. I don't know. I'm not very technical. All right.
Night, everybody. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks,
and for being involved and engaged with us. It was really lovely that you joined us. Lots of love. Bye.